So I thought I'd make this video explaining my master's thesis work, just to have it out there. There's a recording of a conference presentation I gave in 2024, but as of recording it hasn't been uploaded anywhere yet. There's also the actual written thesis itself, but I think access is restricted to university members and in-person visitors. Still, I'll provide links in the description below, along with my bibliography. Anyways, who am I? My name is Kevin Deng, and I was a member of the University of York's 2024 Digital Archaeology cohort. My master's project, By Daylight, by Lamplight, Digital Methods in the Exploration of Historic Lighting, centered around the use of structure for motion photogrammetry and terrestrial laser scanning, combining their strengths and compensating for their weaknesses. Rather than just pursuing visual fidelity for its own sake, I wanted to make a configurable 3D environment that could be used to experiment with the more intangible aspects of historical space, specifically light. My chosen subject was the Parish Church of St. John the Baptist of Kirkhamerton, which is a Grade 1 listed building with elements from the 10th and 19th centuries. Its Lady Chapel in particular is really nice and dramatic, with lots of strong light and shadows. Given my interest in examining light, it was the perfect choice. Anywho, because my research questions involve both the practical and theoretical, we'll have to tackle these topics one at a time. I don't have access to some of the other software anymore, but I'll do my best to show off the Blender model at the end of the video. If only one or some of these parts interest you, I'll do my best to timestamp them for your convenience. Okay, let's get into it. For those of you who may not be familiar with the concept, structure for motion photogrammetry is the process of stitching together two-dimensional photos to create a three-dimensional model. The computer does its best to identify shared features and infer distances and dimensions based on what it sees. This process has gotten pretty good over the years, and it's becoming an increasingly common tool in many industries, including archaeology. After all, it's pretty neat to create a 3D model from just a few photos or a video. That being said, the computer is still guessing at the dimensions in the image and can be easily thrown off by things like shadows and reflections, of which I happen to have a lot. There are ways to calibrate things using reference targets pads, but I wanted to take a bit of a different approach. Terrestrial laser scanning sounds pretty fancy, but it's fairly straightforward. We use a scanner to send out lasers in every direction, and that laser measures coordinate and even color data. This means that the scanner figures out where everything is relative to itself and roughly what they look like. These measurements are extremely accurate, but because it's 1 point of data per laser return, that adds up really quickly into some really ridiculous numbers the more that you scan. And even if you're scanning something fairly simple, you will need to scan at least a few times just to make sure you cover all the angles, because the lasers move in a straight line. Anyways, it becomes a hugely dense file, and it's also a cloud of points rather than a watertight model, which means that it doesn't necessarily translate all that well into other applications without a bit of tinkering. Therefore, I wanted to use the point cloud from the laser scanner to calibrate the photos from the photogrammetry. Think of the lasers as being the bones, and the photos as being the skin that's draped around them. It's a bit gruesome, but it's the best metaphor that I have. So here's a flowchart of the workflow that I used. Cyclone Register 360 is the proprietary software tied to the Latia laser scanner that we had in the department. It has some native functions to help decimate the cloud, which is to say to make it simpler and smaller, but I also used MeshLab, which is an open source software, to further process and decimate it while still having a good amount of control and documentation and repeatability. The real magic here happens with Addersoft Metashape. As to why I use this program, it's what was installed on the York computers, so it's the software that I know best. I'm sure there are many other photogrammetry software programs out there, but this is the one that I used. I'm not the first person to combine photogrammetry and laser scanning in Addersoft. The program actually has a built-in function for it. And there's this tutorial that I found on the online help desk that I consulted while developing my own procedure. I had to adjust the tutorial's instructions to make it work for me, but clearly other people have attempted the same things that I have. As for what adjustments I made to their plan, to be totally honest, it's a bit hard to articulate from memory. I had to mess around with the tie point settings a lot and try a wide range of point cloud densities. I spent at least a week just running attempt after attempt after attempt, using new combinations to see if it made a more stable product, and sometimes even combining the same things could yield two different results. This is all to say that maybe there was a better software to do this on, or I was missing something. Either way, after a bit of a headache, I did have a pretty usable product in the end. So here's a side-by-side of the laser scans cloud and the hybridized model. You can see the way that the photogrammetry really bubbles where the computer has made estimation errors. The church interior happens to be especially moody with lots of shadows, so it's still really difficult for the computer to reconstruct it on its own, even with the help of the laser coordinates. I spent some time cleaning it up manually and also made a rough model of the rest of the church by hand. Now, it might be a good time to talk more about the conceptual side of things as to why I decided to create a hybrid model rather than rely on a different, maybe more conventional method. So, what's the point of making a model? We're trying to capture the likeness of a space in a virtual facsimile to document or recreate its appearance in a specific moment in time. This not only involves whatever it is we want to do with the digital copy, but also involves the making of the copy itself. Photography, scanning, and modeling are all different ways of engaging with a space. Because we're interested in light, and in a broader sense, the feeling of being in this place itself, we need the layout of the space, but we also need the fine details like how the light travels across the different textures of the different stones in the walls. Things like that are eminently noticeable and impactful when you're in Kirk Hamerton itself, and it would be lost by just procedurally generating the texture of the wall as you might if you were just organically modeling it from scratch. And you'd have a hard time really getting this physicality of it and the importance of it from just a normal photograph. I found that by engaging with the space in person and then going back to campus and engaging with the model on screen, I was undergoing this repetitive process of discovery. It's almost like making a painting or something. Regardless of what you set out to do originally, the process of recreation means learning more about what engages you, what you want to focus on, and what you're willing to discard. It's much more involved than just snapping a few glamour shots, and I found it to be a really valuable process to undertake as someone trying to study a space. I'd like to think that in capturing all the detail that I did, even with its flaws, I could cross over into a point where I'm capturing not only the likeness and the appearance of the space, but its actual ambiance and atmosphere. So in order to prove this idea, I rendered the model in 4 different ways to create 4 different moods. These moods demonstrate certain technical aspects of the process, but more importantly, they focus on the basics of what Blender's lighting features can provide archaeologists, while also showing how the changing of the light isn't just a rational exercise or technical demo, it's really a way to engage with the emotions of a space. And here they are. So, for this first render, I tried to match the photo as closely as possible. If you visit now, I think they've actually replaced those light bulbs, so it doesn't look like that anymore. But this is what it looked like at the time. You might notice that certain features are off, like the way that the altar is a bit shorter in the model, but the overall atmosphere is basically the same. Part of this is because those photogrammetry photos were taken, well, at the same time as the reference photo. So the appearance of that moment in time is basically baked in. Those specific patterns of light and shadow are printed onto the surface of the model, and even though I did mirror them in the virtual environment, part of it is those surface images making it look like even more of a match than it maybe really is. So in order to challenge this phenomenon of the moment in time being baked onto the surface of the model, I needed to try changing the light sources and the time of day. This is one that's imitating sunset, which I was not actually present for because I had a train to catch. An important thing to note here is that these windows are not actually simulations of glass, but merely solid pictures of windows that are just kind of there. The window light is instead being simulated by rectangular light sources that I placed in front of the windows themselves, and then blended their colors together to create these dusky twilight hues. I think it looks pretty nice. I then felt obligated to try and honor the title of my thesis by making a candlelight one. Blender provides its own estimates on how to match its simulated light strengths with real-world sources. I tried using these values and did another one based on my own assumptions, and you can see that in either case, the candles don't really seem to do all that much for visibility. You might be able to see how an experiment like this can help us game out how a room would be illuminated, provided you are confident in the accuracy of your light sources, and have maybe a few different ideas of how they might be laid out. I read a lot of really interesting literature about how the other factors at play, like odors and smoke, affect the lighting of a room, but that's another dissertation's worth of work to get any of that simulated in here. On a similar note, I added the titular lamps. Once again, I found the actual value of gas lamps and lumens and translated them into the engine, and placed them more or less by feeling, except for that one on the left there, which actually hangs in real life. You can see how the addition of a second type of light source with its own appearance and characteristics and personality can really change a room, and how light can potentially be used. I also want to talk a little bit about how the model appears with its lights off. It's difficult to understand how our eyeballs' standards of absolute darkness contrast the software's ideas of a zero light value, and it's even harder to fully grasp how they'd scale against one another as you move, numerically, from dark to light. It's impossible for me to discuss this any further without making this video 2 hours long, so I just wanted to throw it out there and move on. Alright, now that that's done, I'll show off the project file and give some kind of off-the-dome retrospective of the project while I'm zooming around. I'll also show some text commentary on screen, so I hope you can multitask. I spent a lot of space reflecting on this in the paper itself, but basically I have a hard time saying if this methodology was actually a success or not. It's true that it looks pretty nice, but it also has some pretty obvious flaws. It's not really as perfect or well-rounded as I hoped it could be. I can make some really nice renders if I set up the scene carefully and angle the camera well, or maybe even a bit deceptively, to be honest. Early on, one of my ambitions was to make models that were clean and efficient enough to be distributed to audiences at large to use however they like, which is an idea somewhat inspired by our department head Colleen Morgan's work with Ketelhoek in Second Life. Basically, I wanted to be able to say that archaeologists can capture space and photograph it and scan it, and then you'd have this nice, clean, packaged model that you can give away to use however. But looking at the model that I made, looking at how much time it took to make, how much special software and equipment it took, and especially how much more time and equipment and even money it would take to iron out the remaining flaws, it's kind of hard to recommend using this workflow outside of very special circumstances. Not exactly democratizing an accessible method that I hope to prove. Still, those errors are addressable, and you can make a better product even with better expertise. This is another thing, actually. I've gotten quite a bit better at photography and 3D modeling since I wrapped up this project, and I think if I were to do it again, I'd do a way better job. Just between you and me, and not for publication, I may have even stated in the paper that there was no way to replicate depth of field in Blender, which is just completely and objectively wrong, but that's the way it goes. I think this hybrid approach does have a place with projects very much like this one, where you're aiming for both high-fidelity documentation and a configurable, adjustable 3D space ready for some sort of emotive interpretation. With more equipment, experience, and money, you could probably do a better job than a sleep-deprived master's student. Shocker, I know. Anyways, that's about all I wanted to say, short of reading my entire paper out loud. Hopefully my CAA lecture will be uploaded to YouTube at some point. I'll do my best to answer any questions in the comments below or via email. I'll just end this by thanking my advisor Peter Schauer and Dav Smith of the Historic Buildings Department for guiding me through this project, as well as Reverend Lawton of Kirkhamerton for so kindly letting me scan her church with lasers. If you actually made it through this entire video, thank you. I'm shocked.